The story begins in the quiet countryside of 1940, where golden fields swayed under the summer wind and the sound of cicadas filled the evening air. A time when the world was trembling on the brink of war, but two hearts, untouched by politics or battle, found solace in each other. Eleanor, with her soft auburn hair and eyes like autumn leaves, lived on the edge of the small town, spending her days helping her mother tend to the garden, sewing, and dreaming of things bigger than the borders of her village. And then there was Thomas, tall and lean, a farm boy with hands calloused from labor yet gentle when they held her own. A boy whose laughter carried across the meadows and whose dreams stretched farther than the horizon he worked beneath. And when they met under the fading glow of dusk, the world seemed to pause as though it acknowledged the birth of something rare and unforgettable. Their love, timid at first, grew like ivy on stone walls, persistent, clinging, impossible to uproot, and in the shade of oak trees, they whispered promises of forever, carving their initials into bark that would long outlive them, believing that nothing could ever part them. Yet history is unkind to lovers who dream too fearlessly, and when the drums of war sounded, calling Thomas away to a battlefield thousands of miles across the ocean, the meadow grew silent, and Eleanor's heart, though wrapped in courage, cracked like porcelain under the weight of goodbye. His uniform crisp, his jaw set, but his eyes soft as he promised he would write every week, every month. Every breath that allowed him to send her words of love, and she too promised she would wait. Her ink flowing on paper that smelled faintly of lavender as she swore she would never let time erase the warmth of his presence. At first the letters came often, filled with small details of his life as a soldier, how the mornings smelled of damp earth, how comrades laughed around fire even when fear stalked their hearts, how the stars in foreign skies reminded him of the nights they shared. But soon the letters grew fewer, war swallowing words as it swallowed men, and Eleanor, still writing faithfully each evening by candlelight, poured her longing, her loneliness, her unwavering devotion onto pages that never reached his hands. The mail lost in the chaos of bloodied battlefields, sacks of envelopes burned or forgotten in trenches, her voice echoing only into silence. Yet she continued, because the act of writing kept her tethered to hope, as if each word was a fragile thread binding her to the boy who had once kissed her under the summer moon. Days bled into months, seasons shifted, and she carried his memory through winters of frostbitten mornings and summers of aching solitude. Her hair braided neatly as she worked at the local schoolhouse, her smile polite but hollow, because no one knew that every night she pressed her lips to letters unsent, letters filled with confessions she dared not speak aloud, of how she feared the sound of footsteps at the door, the telegram that might bear the cruel finality of death. And yet she dreamed, oh, how she dreamed of his return, of their house by the river, of children with his eyes and her laughter, of a life untouched by the iron grip of history. But the years dragged and her letters piled like a mountain of unspoken love, tucked carefully in a ribbon-bound box beneath her bed. Thomas, meanwhile, endured the endless march of war, mud caking his boots, rain seeping into his bones, explosions tearing the night into shards of terror. And through it all, when despair clawed at him, he clutched her photograph, worn at the edges, folded countless times, her face the only anchor against the storm that threatened to unmoor him completely. And he too wrote, scribbling in cramped handwriting by flickering candlelight, pages filled with yearning, apologies, hopes for the future, but fate, cruel and indifferent, scattered his words into the void, letters never finding their way back to Eleanor, leaving her heart to wither under the absence of his voice. And as years passed, she grew quieter, her beauty deepened with sorrow, until townsfolk whispered that perhaps she would never marry, that perhaps she was cursed to be alone, yet she carried herself with grace. Her love, a secret flame that refused to be extinguished, because in her heart, Thomas was not gone, he was merely delayed, trapped in a world she could not reach. The war ended, bells rang, parades filled streets, soldiers returned home to embrace wives and sweethearts, laughter and tears flooding towns. But for Eleanor, there was only silence. Number Thomas stepping off the train, no familiar arms around her shoulders. Only the cold realization that he might never come back. Though no death notice arrived, no final word. Just absence a crueler ghost than death itself, so she waited. Year after year, her letters gathering dust, her hair silvering slowly, her voice fading into the rhythm of days. And all the while, somewhere across oceans, the bundle of letters Thomas had written lay forgotten in a damp military trunk, hidden in a storage room where dust and shadows conspired to bury his love in silence. Until decades later, when fate decided to stir the ashes of their story once more. It was the spring of 1982 when a young historian named Claire stumbled upon an old military trunk in the archives of a forgotten warehouse near Washington. Its metal hinges rusted, the wood splintered, dust blanketing its surface like a shroud over memory. And when she forced it open, coughing at the stale air that rushed out, she found stacks of yellowed letters tied with faded twine, the ink smudged by time, but still legible. And at the top of the pile was a name written again and again, with trembling devotion, Eleanor letters, written by Thomas. A soldier, long gone, his words speaking not to history, but to the woman he had loved with every fiber of his being. Words that had never reached her. Words that had withered unheard for more than 40 years. And Claire, with tears brimming, realized she was holding not just documents, but the pulse of two broken hearts. She felt it her duty to return them, so she sought Eleanor. Now, an old woman with frail hands and silver hair, living quietly in the same small town. Her days filled with silence and the hum of a radio that played songs from her youth. And when the knock came at her door, she opened it with the weariness of one who had long ceased expecting visitors, only to see a young stranger holding a bundle of letters bound in time. And when Claire spoke his name, Thomas Eleanor's breath faltered, her heart stumbling as though it had been struck by lightning, her trembling hands reaching out as though afraid the letters would dissolve into dust if she touched them. And when she untied the bundle and read the first page, her tears fell onto the faded ink, merging present sorrow with past longing. Because every word was a whisper she had waited her whole life to hear. His promises, his fears, his love, his desperate hope that she would still be there when the war ended. His dreams of holding her again, his apologies for not being enough, all of it spilling into her frail heart like a river that had been dammed for decades. Night after night she sat by the window, the same window where she had once written her own letters under candlelight. And now she read his, her lips trembling as she traced each line, as if his hand were guiding hers across the page. And with each letter, she rediscovered not just the boy she had loved, but the life they were robbed of, the moments they might have had, the children they never raised, the years lost to silence. And yet in those letters, she also found a strange kind of healing. For though the war had stolen their youth, his words had preserved their love. Keeping it untouched by time, pure and unbroken, she began to write again, not to send but to answer. Pages filled with what she had lived, how she had waited, how she had loved him even in absence, telling him of birthdays spent alone, of nights spent whispering his name into the dark, of dreams that carried him beside her when reality was too cruel. And she placed her letters beside his in the box. A conversation decades too late, but still real, still binding. As if death itself could not sever the thread between them. Word of the discovery spread through the town. And neighbors, once puzzled by her solitude, now wept with her, recognizing the enormity of her devotion. And the story of Eleanor and Thomas became a whisper of faith and tragedy told in hushed tones at the local church, in schoolrooms, in cafes, a reminder that love, though silenced, never truly dies. But Eleanor's time was waning, her breath shallower with each passing season. And one autumn evening, as the leaves burned red and gold outside her window, she sat in her chair with Thomas's last letter in her lap, the one where he had written of a dream he had of returning to her after the war, of holding her hand by the river where they had carved their initials. And as her eyes closed, she imagined it was real, that he was there, young again, reaching for her hand, calling her name. And with a faint smile, she slipped away, her heart finally at peace. Her soul reunited with his in the place beyond wars and time. When Claire came to visit the next morning, she found Eleanor gone. But beside her bed lay the box of letters, her own replies neatly stacked beside his. Two voices separated by history but joined at last in words. And Claire, tears streaming, vowed to preserve their story, to ensure the world knew of the lovers who had been torn apart but never truly divided. So she donated the letters to a museum where they were displayed under glass. People from around the world pausing to read the ink of two broken souls, some weeping, some silent, all moved by the reminder that history is not only battles and nations, but also the fragile, burning hearts of those caught in its storm. And so Eleanor and Thomas lived on, not in the meadow where they had first kissed, not in the house by the river they never built, but in the minds of those who read their words, in the ache that stirred when strangers saw the word forever written in shaky handwriting across a page that time had tried and failed to erase. And though their bodies had long returned to dust, their love, yielding, tragic, eternal, became a lantern in the dark corridors of memory, proof that even when the world forgets, love remembers, and even when silence reigns, letters, once lost, can still speak louder than death itself.